So a little bit about me, Chris Couchman, Senior Sales Engineer here at Seven Signal. I've been in the industry for over 20 years, working on various systems and networking. There's my list of certificates as of current. I've got a couple more I'm working on. I did have to put on there CWTS because that was way back in 2012 and has since been retired and is no longer functioning as an actual cert on the CWNP website. And then I had to put my USPA license there because I am a licensed skydiver. C license, which means I have over 200 jumps and can land within the parameters that are defined by the license. So my license number is 50,938. And I thought this picture was pretty interesting because this is right after opening, parachutes open. I'm kind of doing a visibility check. I'm grabbing my rear risers so I know where to look and turn. And the same sort of thing when you're out and doing a wireless design, you got to kind of have your head on a swivel of what's going on. But what I wanted to point out here is this little thing on my wrist. And that's what's called an altimeter. So most altimeters are analog. So it's got a little pressure gauge in there. It tells you what altitude you're at. But this one in particular is made by a company called Dakunu, and it's called the Dakunu One. And the reason why I point this out is because it's actually Wi-Fi enabled. So this is a Wi-Fi device that's actually functioning in the air while I'm falling, obviously not connected to anything at that point. But when I land, it connects to an access point and reports all that data that has come in from my skydive. Fall rates, GPS coordinates, all that fun stuff, and sends it up to the cloud, and then I get to consume it from there. So you can't escape Wi-Fi no matter where you go.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
And I got to ask, after all these jumps, when you open up the parachute, do you still look up and breathe a sigh of relief and everything looks good and there's no tangles and it's all opened up normally?
Absolutely. I actually had my first malfunction that I had to have a cutaway last summer when I was in Arizona. It was I would say it's probably a packing error on my fault. I had what's called a line over. So all these lines that you can see up in the parachute, one of these lines was actually over top of the canopy and actually bow tied it. So the left side was collapsed down and it wasn't functioning right. So I had to perform my emergency procedures and cut away my parachute and go to my reserve. So hopefully I never have that happen again.
Wow.
But it was based on training, the same thing we're going to be talking about in here, I was able to perform those procedures with just basic muscle memory and continue on. So, different things you do in life and how to apply your training appropriately. So the next thing here is a wireless design is just not walking around with an AP and a laptop. There's a lot of misconceptions that, as a wireless engineer, you just walk around and, smell the air, you're listening, you're taking in the data, and you just kind of create a design from that. And that's not at all what it's about. So there's a lot of other things that take into consideration. And one other thing to remember with this is that no two designs are the same. They're not the same on the day you were there. They're not going to be the same the second day you're there. There's different RF, there's different people, there's different configurations. The environment is always changing. So you take the best of what you can get and create a product that's going to hopefully fit the design you're trying to accomplish. So a little bit of a quick agenda. We're going to talk about design specifications. We're also going to work into this a little bit of defining these specifications as well. We're going to talk about a little bit about wireless design and design deliverables and validation, because this is super important that, whatever you design, that you're able to validate that you're going to, whatever you propose is actually going to be delivered. So one thing I wanted to point out, which is a great line in the CWDP book, is, the 4 stages of a wireless design is you have to define what you're trying to accomplish. You have to design to that definition. You have to be able to deploy it and then validate and optimize that design that you're proposing. It's 4 very key characteristics of any sort of design that you're going to be doing in the field. And I just thought it was a great line to kind of quote out of the book. So for design specifications, one thing in that last slide that I said was define. You're going to be defining things throughout the entire process from the start to finish. And one of those things that you're going to work on is in the design specifications. You're going to be defining these requirements as you go. So in this list here, you have to come up with a business case for this design. What is the true purpose of it? And from there, you can come up with your requirements. Some things to consider are the amount of users that are in the environment. Is this going to be fluctuating from time to time? Are you going to have large auditoriums that you're going to have to oversubscribe for many different people coming in, or is it going to be pretty much static? kind of one of the themes I want to keep across this entire presentation is that, kind of think of this in a kind of a warehouse kind of scenario. If we get too broad, a lot of questions come in, and it's easier just to kind of focus in one direction. So let's kind of keep this in a warehouse kind of scenario so we can, build upon that. But even in a warehouse, you still have meetings of users. So if you have morning meetings where they come through and they talk to all the fork truck drivers or all the pick and pull people that come in, use their wireless shared devices, they're going to be gathering in a certain area. Maybe you have to keep that into consideration. Or maybe there's a training room in the front of the warehouse where they do some additional stuff that you have to keep in consideration. So user counts are always important. Type of devices. This is typically pretty static for most places, but you have to think about, not only the type of devices, but how many devices there are, because it's going to be different than the user count. When it comes to a shared device, there's typically going to be more shared devices than users because you have multiple shifts. You have multiple different things out there. You've got fork trucks that all have devices on them. Your users are going to be bringing in additional devices on top of their laptops and tablets and phones and everything else that comes in there. So those are some key things to think about when you're really looking at a design and what's actually going to be used in the environment. One of the other things to look at is applications. What applications are you trying to support, and what are their specifications? There's specific latency and specific data rates that you need to apply to these. Are they on-prem? Are they off-prem? What is your overall connectivity from that building, not only from a wireless perspective, but out on the edge? Do you need to factor in your actual networking and your WAN connectivity? Those are things to think about. And then security. So what kind of security are you going to be using in your wireless design? And not only just security for the wireless design and, talking about 802.1x or, a pre-shared key or something along those lines. What do you need to think about from security of the actual networking equipment? Do those have to be secured? They have to be locked down? Do you have to worry about somebody walking off with something? Is part of this design going to be outside? So these need to have some sort of locking mechanism. So not only physical security, but actually the security of the wireless LAN itself. And then aesthetics, what is this going to look like in your environment? Do you need to hide your access points as best as you can where you only see the antennas? Do you need to worry about skinning the access points, putting something on them to make them look more aesthetically pleasing? Do you have to paint them? What are the requirements for your customer that you're actually looking for? Some people that I've dealt with in the past, it's a simple backer board with a piece of plywood, a giant reflective sticker, the AP and the antennas mounted on it, and that's perfectly fine. Where others want actual physical mounts that are going to be able to remote locate the AP and the antenna separately, and they want this to be to look very nice when it's in the ceiling or hanging from the rafters. That it just doesn't look like an omnidirectional antenna just hanging up there, from a beam clamp. You have to put some thought around this. And then also the service area. Is this inside the building? As I said, is it outside the building? What do you have to consider? Is it inside of semi trucks? Do you have to worry about getting signal into other places you may not be thinking about at the time? So define that service area and get all this stuff in writing so you know what you're actually trying to cover. And then the two of the biggest ones I have at the bottom are budget and time. So budget is one of those things where, as a wireless engineer, I could go crazy and create and cover just about anything you want, but is it going to fit into the budget that's built in for the use case, for the business case of this design? There's no unlimited money all the time. You have to fit into the specifications that are designed, and then make that budget fit for whatever size building you have. And if you don't get that, then you have to be able to have the use case or the requirements on why you need more to make this work, because some areas might have chain link fence around them or something that's going to impede the wireless signal that you have to add additional access points that you weren't thinking about in the initial thought process. And then time. This one is the biggest one, because when you talk about a wireless survey, it's like, oh yeah, or a wireless design, it doesn't happen in a day. If you're talking about an 800,000 square foot warehouse, you're not surveying that in a day. You're not designing that in a day. You're not doing a validation in a day. It's going to take time. So you want to make sure that when you're thinking about these things, you allow yourself amount of time that you can go in, do the design properly, give yourself time to validate it, and do all the documentation as well, because it's not only your time on the floor in this facility, it's the time prepping, getting all this information, collecting it, putting together this business case and your SOWs and all of your paperwork up front that says all of these things that need to be there, so that when you start your design itself, you have a strict set of requirements so you don't end up with scope creep. So if you come into this and say, hey, this is what you told me, and all of a sudden, the next day, or you show up on site and like, oh, by the way, we added another 300 devices, that wasn't in scope, and that's going to affect your time. So make sure you get all this defined in a nice SOW or a nice statement of work that you can use to deliver this information. So keep that in mind when you build in this into your time bucket. Jim, anything else you want to add to this?
Yeah, good comment from Ron in the chat about historically significant buildings. And, when you think about aesthetics there, it goes from, this is the appearance we would like to desire, to these are the very strict, hard and fast rules that you must obey that are very limiting and can be very challenging, particularly when it comes to running cable runs and doing wall penetrations. Those are usually big no-nos, big challenge. And if you have any advice there, drop it in the chat. Let us know how you've tackled that.
So I can actually directly relate to this in one of the designs I did for the Ohio State House. The building was built in the 1800s. You cannot see technology. You are not allowed to see technology anywhere in the facility. So you're literally hiding stuff behind cabinets or on top of cabinets. And when you talk about walls, they are 16 feet thick. So you're not drilling through those to pull any sort of cabling in the basement of that place. So there's a whole company that's literally set around setting expectations for that design and what you're allowed to get away with. It's absolutely crazy. So yeah, historically significant buildings are definitely something to take into consideration when you're trying to design.
And I laughed because Ron sent a message just to the hosts and panelists. So not everybody saw it, but when I asked for advice, he said, run screaming.
Or once again, give yourself a lot of time to really spend on that. So once you get all of that kind of basic information about the use case of it, we really need to start thinking about the technical requirements. And this plays into that initial set of business use cases, because this is going to be kind of setting up what you're going to be doing in the design itself. So you're probably going to find out what vendor you're going to be using from the business case. You're going to know what their infrastructure is. So is the vendor cloud or controller based? Is it on-prem, or is it, do you have to worry about some sort of latency out to the cloud? So you have to think about that from not only a wireless perspective, but also the networking infrastructure that you have to support. Do you have the switches and infrastructure to support that? If you got a controller, do you have the power for it? Do you have the fiber connections? Do you have everything you need to get out to whatever area that you're going to be servicing? The devices and infrastructure. So what devices? It could be a couple of different things. It could be the controller, it could be the access points, it could be the switches, it could be the infrastructure itself. What are your what switches do you have in the environment? What are their PoE capabilities? What do you have to work with? That's really going to also play into the design specifications, that if you have the latest and greatest access points, they may not work in this environment. They may need to also consider doing a switch upgrade to be able to support the new infrastructure. What are your uplinks in that scenario as well? So there's a lot you have to really consider there. And the environment, I kind of touched on it in the beginning, is, is it indoor and outdoor? Do you have to worry about having outdoor rated access points? When you talk about that as well, you got to start thinking about antennas and drip loops and all that sort of stuff. There's a lot of things that come into the environmental section of this that really come into play more than just an indoor type scenario. And even in indoor, you really need to think about the environment when it comes to heating and cooling. Are you working in a cooler? Are you working in a freezer? What are your operating temperatures of the access points that you're going to be working with? Do they support what you're trying to accomplish? You need to look at the spec sheets and make sure that they're going to meet the requirements for the design that you're trying to come up with. And as I talked in the security as well, what is the physical? What's the authentication? What's the encryption? These are all things that you need to think about when thinking of the technical requirements. Does the equipment that you're trying to implement support these specifications? Is there a Kensington lock slot on the side of it? Or is it just to use a hex key that's going to screw it down to whatever the mounting plate's going to be? What is the physical security mechanisms that these access points and antennas have to be able to keep them from getting stolen, moved, or turned? You need to think about those things. And then the authentication encryption, just because they say they want to have an 802.1x authenticated wireless network, do they have the infrastructure to support it? Do they have a radius server? Do they have PKI? What do they have on the inside that's already there? Or are you expected to do that too? They may ask you for auth that they don't have already. So you need to validate that's already there and working before you think about implementing something along those lines. And then roaming requirements. What are you trying to support in their environment? Is it RTLS? Is it, are you trying to support VoIP? How are your devices moving around? In this picture on the screen, I've got a fork truck. That thing moves probably 20, 30 miles an hour. Do you have access point placements in the right spot that you're going to be able to move from AP to AP to AP? And does the device on this fork truck, is it going to roam at a speed that's going to be able to match the access points you're moving under? That's another piece that you really need to think about. And it really comes in the optimization section of this, but it's the good things to think of ahead of time, because there are settings inside those tablets or Thor devices or whatever they are, that you can change the roaming aggressiveness of how often it's going to scan and look for access points.
Yeah, and thinking about the devices and the infrastructure, what's the network architecture? What's the logical design of the network? And if you're going with a cloud vendor, are they going to be able to accommodate changing that to push VLANs all the way out to the access layer for those APs? If they do that, are you going to have some layer 3 roaming issues? Those are all things to consider too. So
yeah, absolutely. All right, so now that we have all that out of the way, we've kind of laid some loose groundwork for what we need to think about when we're coming up with our requirements and actually starting the survey. We need to talk about what design hardware we're going to use while we're on site. So this is a loose list of things that I would have in my tool chest that I would take on site. I don't think it's complete. I think I might be missing a few things. And I want to get some input from the chat of what else you would add to this list. So in my case, when I used to do surveys or designs all the time, and I'd travel the United States and Canada, and I'd be running around all over the world, what I would have is a ton of different stuff. And everything we covered in the previous slides would have me adapt my giant Pelican case that I took around. You can use whatever vendor you want, but I had a giant Pelican hard side case that I'd take on the plane. So I would determine what access points I would need, and I would include the vendor, because if it was Cisco, it would be one set of access points. If it was Aruba, it was another, or whatever. Throw in your random vendor in there. You'd have to bring those access points with you. And I'd bring internal access points, and I'd bring external access points, and I'd bring extra access points, because I've had APs fail because when you're traveling and you're taking the suitcase and you're throwing in the plane, it gets bounced around and stuff breaks. So you want to make sure that you at least have one of each. If you can afford to have extras, bring them with you. But remember, you're still, unless your company's paying for the additional weight, you still got to fit this into that 50-pound weight limit for the access point. Tripods and AP mounts. So when you think of this really kind of plays into the cart section as well. So in my tripod setup, I had a tripod that ran on, had casters and a base that was built specifically to hold that device with enough weight underneath it that I could run a tripod up, probably 15, 20 feet without having any issues worrying about that tipping over. It was also covered in high-vis tape, so I didn't have to worry about anybody not seeing it. But in some cases, I also had to bring in some additional safety measures around that cart, which I've listed down lower in the safety equipment we'll talk about. But the AP mounts are very important. There's how are you mounting access points to this tripod, or how are you mounting access points and antennas to lifts or to boom lifts, or whatever you're trying to do to get access points up to the level where you're trying to design at. You have to think about all those different pieces. And then the carts. I've seen a couple different carts that are out there. I've seen people use janitor carts that break down and you can pack up pretty small. Like I said, I got a wooden one that had wheels on it that I rolled around. But anything you can put all this stuff on, because you don't want to carry this once you're on site, and dragging around a giant Pelican case is probably not the most efficient way of doing things. Next is going to be antennas, from the design and from, everything that you collected ahead of time, what kind of antennas are you going to be using in this environment? Are they patch antennas? Are they sectors? Are there omnis? Are you using antennas at all? Are you just doing, the carpeted space in front of this warehouse? Is it just the office space? You only need internals. Bring enough that you can adapt to whatever you need to make sure it fits what the client's acceptable for. Because I've had a few different clients that, they only said, hey, if you're going to use antennas, I only want to use patches. Well, that wasn't really the best. So we made some considerations, and we, went back and looked at those requirements and hey, this is really going to need, some, really narrow beam stuff to run down these aisles. We might need some omnis in these other places. Bring a bunch of different antennas so you can adapt to that environment to make sure that when you're doing those designs that you have everything you need, and the Swiss Army knife of antennas. Ethernet console cables, those are always good to have in multiples, because in order to power your access points, you need Ethernet cables. You might need one to go to your laptop to be able to connect to the site. If it is a brand new site and there's nothing there, they may not have wireless or anything that you can connect to, so you need to be able to hardwire into the network. Console cables to configure the access points, because things change. If you run out there and you're doing your surveys or you're doing your design and you run in some interference or something, you might need to change channels. You might need to change channel widths. You may have forgot something from the last survey you did, and it may not be configured right. So you need to be able to get into those APs and do that. Cable ties, tape, and etc. This is everything that you're going to need to make sure that once you're starting your design, that it's secure, because you don't want an access point falling from 20 feet above your head. You don't want something, coming loose. If you need to tape something down, these are super great things to have in your bag and they're consumables. So you want to make sure that you have plenty of them in there at all times. And then the safety equipment. This is really something that's going to be done by site, really, and by the actual customer's requirements. So when it comes to PPE, do you need a vest? Most of the time in my dealings in warehouses, I had vests. If I was on lifts, I'd have to have a hard hat. Or if I was on a lift, I need to have some sort of fall restraint. So you need a harness, and you have to be certified in that too if you have that. You might need steel-toed shoes. You might need gloves or glasses. All these things you have to think about, and this is all going to be per site and per customer requirements of what you need on there. And then, as I said, with the carts and the tripods, things you have to put around that. You might have to have bring collapsible cones, so you can set an area around your access point setup so that everybody can see it. And it might have to be high vis. It might have to need you might have to put a tape around things. It just really depends on what they want you to do. But those are some additional things you might think about. One thing that I've found over the years, it's actually become more obtainable, because when I first started doing this in the early 2000s, it wasn't something that was readily available or inexpensive, is a laser measurement tool. And not only just a laser measurement tool when it comes to distance, when you're thinking about checking ceiling heights or wall lengths or whatever else, hot and cold. Because when you're in a 30 or 40-foot warehouse, you need to understand what the temperature is at that ceiling to make sure that your access points are actually going to function when it's in the middle of summer and it's 140 some degrees up there. You need to take that into consideration, that your access points may not be able to work for a very long time in an environment like that. And then something you're not going to take with you on a plane, but is a lift. And this is something that usually they can get people at times where lift doesn't get delivered in time. You need to make sure it's there ahead of the time when you get on site. Is it a scissor lift? Is it a boom lift? What kind of lift do you need? And then, are you certified on it? So you'll need to make sure that you have a certification to operate whatever lift is going to be there, and make sure that you have somebody that's going to deliver it and pick it up, because that's the last thing you want to do is rent a lift and then it sits there for a month and they charge you for it.
Yeah. How about in warehouses, do you ever bring a battery with PoE for doing AP on a stick measurement, or
I
find
do.
power sources?
Yeah, so that's actually a great point. One of the things I didn't put in here was extension cords. I normally had an extension cord of some sort to charge the lift, because those don't come with it. But I didn't put it in this equipment list for battery packs for PoE. I have it in my next slide, which is what comes in your backpack, because you can't pack a lithium battery and pack it in a plane. You can't check that, so you need to bring it with you. So when you talk about additional things that go outside of your case, PoE injectors, backup batteries, internals, lithiums, you need to put those in the bags you're carrying on the plane or whatever you're traveling with. So you have access to them in case something happens. You can quickly and effectively deal with it from a fire perspective. You don't want to check those on the plane itself. So does that answer that question, Jim?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they want the fire to break out in the passenger area, not in the storage area of the plane.
Yeah. you can at least react to something like that a little bit easier than not
That's
having
true.
access to it in the cargo hold.
Yeah.
So I did think ahead of that, because that's, having traveled with just even the battery backups for, my phone and whatever else, on a personal trip, you have to take those on the plane with you. So anything else you would add to that list as I go back here real quick?
Looks good to me.
All right.
People in the chat asking for the WLAN Pi, but that's a backpack item for you.
Yes, it is a backpack item for me because it is a little fragile. I want to make sure that, it doesn't get lifted out of my bag when it's checked. Not to say that happens, but, I think everybody's has had a story or two where something's mystically disappeared out of their luggage at one point or another. So I take this with me on the plane. But in your backpack, so we have a nice little 7-signal backpack up here. And congratulations to the folks that won the backpacks at the WLPC event we had. But in your backpack, this is some of the things that I take with me on my design surveys. Is one is a laptop, right? I have a laptop that I need to use. I've got an iPad or a tablet. I have an Android tablet that I run around with. On that laptop, you need design software, and I didn't put licensing, but you need to have it licensed. So hopefully if you're going on site to do a design, you've already pre-populated your laptop with that. And from design software, what else would you include in here? Because I've got Spectrum Analyzer on here, but I want to see what other software you might bring with you, Jim, just besides as a design tool.
I would bring Wi-Fi Explorer Pro for sure.
Yep.
Wireshark.
Mm-hmm.
The WLAN Pi profiler software could be really helpful if some clients show up that I can get my hands on.
Mm-hmm.
And Adrian's tool, what's it called? Air tool that lets you do.
Yep.
Yeah,
Good.
packet captures really easily.
Perfect. Yep. That's fantastic. I appreciate that. Those are additional things that, don't always get thought of because you get so caught up in the design that you're just trying to figure out what you're doing and getting it done. You don't think about the other things that come along with it. So design software, additional tools, those are all good things to have on your laptop. The adapters, you have specific adapters that you're using. Are you running Ekahau? Do you have a Sidekick? Are you using an AirCheck G2? Are you using just a Wi-Fi dongle for capturing data and capturing spectrum? You have extra dongles. You have the additional adapters that you need to make all those actually connect. They may be USB-A and you need USB-C. You have those dongles with you too, because I've run into that where, the last couple laptops that I had when I was doing designs had USB-C, but the cables that came with the survey equipment only supported USB-A. So I had to be able to convert that. Chargers and PoE injectors. Think about charging your laptop. Think about PoE injectors for those the external, or if you don't have a backup or external battery and you need to run off of 110 or whatever your power is in your country, make sure you have power injectors that you can power that up from there as well. And the reason why I bring this up with power injectors is because if you're in a harsh environment, like a freezer or in a chiller, those batteries are going to die a lot quicker. And you may only get 40% charge on that or less, depending on how cold that environment is. So if you can power that, that access point off a PoE injector instead, that'll increase your design time that you're going to have to run around that environment to do that. But also remember, your laptop is probably not going to last as long either in those harsh environments. So having extra chargers, if you have a laptop that has a removable battery, do you have an extra one of those? Things to think about to increase your productivity while you're on site. I put laptop harness in here, and a good friend of mine, Ryan, was a very big fan of the laptop harness. Connected Desk, I think, makes one. There's a few other brands that are out there. I could never get it to work. My arms just couldn't fit in the harness and do this. I just couldn't. So I always just one-handed the laptop around. But for comfort and for your back, I definitely recommend one of these, especially after hours and hours and hours of walking around on your feet, is something to think about. I already touched up on backup batteries and externals. PPE, things you could probably pack in your suitcase, but if you want to wear them, your boots. So we talked about having safety toe boots, whether they're steel toe or composite. Make sure they're comfortable. Make sure you have your inserts. If you got anything that you need to make your life a little bit easier while you're walking around. I've strapped a set of boots on my backpack and carried them on the plane multiple times because, I'd be gone for a week and my overnight bag's already too heavy. So I'll just use it as my other personal item on the plane. If you're doing outdoor surveys, GPS, and then camera I've got on here. And now most people think your cell phone. Sometimes you have to take high res pictures. So you might need an actual camera. And I have an asterisk on this because you need to figure out if the site's going to allow you to do this. There are some restrictions with, security and, intellectual property and whatnot that you may not be able to take a camera in there, and you have to think about that. Do you need to leave your phone at the front office? Do you need to not have a camera anywhere on you? It's really going to impact your design when it comes to your deliverables or what you're actually be able to propose, but make sure you keep that in check when you go on site to make sure that you are keeping everything there. And the last one I have is the WNPI, and the amount of features that this thing does is just absolutely phenomenal. So this is a great tool to have in your toolkit to be able to do additional testing, whether it's active or not, scanning and whatnot. You have, the WNPI is endless on those things. When Jim was talking about profiler, there you go. So it's a really good thing to have.
Do you ever bring a dedicated cable tester, or are the features in WNPI that can do some of that now?
Yeah, so that comes into the networking piece, and on the design side, when I'm going out, I normally don't have one of those with me because I'm usually I'm designing it then. If I come back and I do my optimization, that's when I'll bring that in. But I also rely on my installers to provide me those cable test results so that I'm not having to do that. But having one for troubleshooting, absolutely. If you have one available to you, it's a very quick way to see if you have an open set of an open pair or something that's going wrong and someone just hasn't punched something down right. It's definitely worth having. We got anything else?
That's it.
All right. I can't see the chat, so I apologize.
That's all right.
All right. So when we actually get to design, now we've got all the equipment we're taking on site. We're going to talk about, what we're going to need from that facility as far as getting everything set up to do the design and make sure that it's right. So the first thing we need is a scaled image. What are we actually going to be surveying or designing off of? We need a scaled image of the site with all the information on it. And we need a clean image. So what that means is does it have a bunch of extra layers on it? Is it a fire escape map? What is this? What are we actually looking at from this site? Does it have all the movable and immovable objects on it that we need to be concerned with that are going to be represented in there? Does it have the rows? Does it not have the rows? Because in that case, then you're trying to go through and mark up this image as best you can. It's best to have a clean image of what you're actually trying to survey. And then you need something that's going to be supported by the design software that you're using. So if you can, get a DWG, a CAD drawing with only the layers that are needed. Once again, going back to that clean image, you can subtract the HVAC, you can subtract lighting or light switches or whatever else that is on there. You need to be able to have only the layers that you need to do your design efficiently. PDFs, PNGs, JPEGs, make sure it's a format that's supported by the software. And I wanted to put BIM on there because there was a very good conversation that happened at WLPC with a presenter, and I forget her name, that went through this. I think she was with IV Wave that was talking about this. And it was pretty interesting. I haven't had a chance to use this format yet, but from what she displayed, it would look pretty interesting and had and kind of piqued my interest there. So the next thing we're going to look at is the type of design. So once we have our images, we have all this stuff, and this type of design, you can, like I said, we're going to be defining all of this throughout. And the type of design should probably be set up in the very beginning when we talk about the business case for this. But there's a couple different ones that are out there. You have a predictive design, and you're going to notice you had validation with each one of these. And I'm going to key off of those on the second one because you want to validate every single one of your designs that you are doing, because you need to make sure whatever's proposed is actually what happened. And not only from your design to make sure that that's correct, but it was installed correctly. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So predictive, are you doing just a straight predictive design? Are you ever going on site? Or is the site even there? It's going to be there eventually, so you want to validate it after the fact. And you want to make sure you keep this also in that business case, so you have time to do the validation. Are you doing a hybrid design, which means are you doing a predictive design then going on site and validating? Or are you doing a half and half where you do a predictive, you go out, you check an access point, you make sure the coverage is what you're expecting it to be, and then you're using, you know, all the attenuation values and everything you have out there, and then you go back and you validate? Or is this, you know, just truly just an AP on a stick survey? Are you just taking an access point, going out there, throwing it on a tripod, not doing anything else, which I don't recommend, but, you know, are you just doing it on site? You know, AP after AP, building it out by hand, which we used to do back in the day before we really had the ability to do predictive designs. Date myself a little bit, but, you know, when you went out to a warehouse, it, you know, it changed every day, but you were out there with an AP on a stick and you're validating actually what's happening, you know, every single time. So, Jim, what are your thoughts on those different types of designs? What would
Yeah, I
you?
put asking in the chat how often people are still doing AP on a stick. Just talking to some of the partners we have, I know some of them still get engaged with those kind of manufacturing jobs where the customer will require it. Certainly gives you the highest level of precision, but I think the predictive modeling you can do now, coupled with a site visit where you just kind of walk around and kind of you know, sanity check what you think the construction of the site really is. I think you can get really good results with that.
Yeah,
but you still got to do your validation as well.
absolutely. And the other thing nice, you know, with a predictive, and the key to that, Jim, is the site visit. You know, being able to go on site, see what's actually there, make sure that, you know, the maps and the images that you've got are actually what's on site, and then pulling those attenuation values from the different pieces of equipment that are out there. Because in a warehouse, or, you know, even you know, other spots where things change all the time, you need to make sure that if, you know, if there's a stack of, you know, a box of water in one row, it's going to go to the next when they, you know, make an efficiency change and move stuff around. You need to be able to validate the attenuation is always going to be the same in those areas, what it's going to look like when things move, and then making sure that you're using that to do your predictive design so that your coverage is correct when you actually build it out. All right, so talking about on-site, and say you know, you're doing an AP on a stick survey, or you're doing your hybrid, or you're going out and you're doing your site visit, you know, some of the things you need to think about when you're on site in the environment itself. Once again, you know, PPE, I stress on this because it is super important, because if fork trucks are actively running around, they may not be able to see you. You're going to hear their horns and things. You're going to try to duck out of the way of them. But you need to have your equipment on so everybody can see you and understand what you're doing. Do you need an escort while you're there? You know, this is important as well. You know, if they require someone else to be there, they've got to walk around with you the entire time. You need to factor that in, not only to the time that you have to do your survey, because they're not going to be walking at the same speed you are. And if they have to be with you every second, you might have to adjust how you're doing things. And the building architecture, we talked about that already with the historical buildings, but this really gives you an idea to see, you know, what you're looking at from the building side, what materials it's made out of. Is it metal? Is it brick? Is it stone? Is it, you know, 300 years old? You know, what is it actually made out of, and how do you how are you going to work around that, not only from, you know, placing access points, but working on the physical plant infrastructure of how you're going to get stuff back in there. Attenuation values, so being able to pull out, you know, what you're looking at from an access point read from one place to another. Make sure you pull that information. You know, what's the height of the building? Validate this, because sometimes people are going to take the value from the bottom of the rafters or the top of the racks, and it's not going to be the height of the ceiling. So then you need to think about, when you're placing your antennas, when in the next section, AP and antenna install restrictions, can you bring those APs off the ceiling? Can you get them closer to the actual users? Can they be installed on walls? You know, all these different things come into play when you actually start trying to, once you do your predictive design or you do your hybrid design, can you actually install those access points in those areas? And what are the restrictions around them? Because you might have HVAC, you might have lighting, you might have restricted areas where you just can't put anything up there. And sometimes it might not be on the maps that you get. So this is a very good way to validate that as well. And then the restricted mounting, as I said, you know, cleaning freezers. Do you have to mount the access point on the outside and mount the antenna on the inside? Are there clean rooms you have to deal with? Is there hazmat areas that may be electrically sensitive, so you have to worry about explosive rated enclosures and those type of things. There's a lot of stuff that goes into play, not only in warehouses, but in hospitals and all kinds of other places that you may see this. You'll be surprised how many warehouses I've come across where they have clean rooms in the middle because they're doing some sort of manufacturing medication that they're doing basically just in time. They're creating the medication, they're putting it out to the warehouse, and it's getting shipped out the same day. So there's a lot of stuff that may come into play there. And then also survey hours. When can you actually be on site? There'll be days that, I've done surveys for 14 hours because I've got a limited time to get it in. I've got only so many days on site, so I get to work a super long time and walk a lot of square footage. But can you do that at this facility? Is there somebody going to be there all hours of the day, or is it you can only survey from 11 p.m. to 3 a.m. Hopefully that's not the case, but you need to understand if that's something that's there as well. Anything else to think of on the site itself, Jim, that you would think of?
Yeah, maybe if you're doing predictive, this would be a good time to do some wall measurements.
Mm-hmm.
You can plug those right into your model and increase the accuracy there. And not just typical walls, but some of those walls that don't look normal, like maybe there's a giant concrete firewall in there or something. Go do some measurement there and see what you find.
Yeah, absolutely. Throw an AP on one side, walk to the other, see what your values are. Really understand what it is, because depending if it was built in the last 20 years, it could be made out of wood, it could be made out of steel, and just be drywalled over. So it's going to be, the architecture is going to change, and you need to make sure you validate all that. So very good. All right. So other things to think of outside of just doing the wireless design, and you're doing you're thinking about what the RF is going to look like. You need to take in consideration the physical plan of the building. So where are your wiring closets? What are your distance from your access points? Can you get an IDF or a rack somewhere in the warehouse where they're going to have to take out a section of racking to be able to put a set of switches in to power all your APs? These are things you need to think about when in your design, because if your building is 800,000, 1 million square feet, you're not going to get an AP run of 300 feet beyond that. So you need to be able to consider, take into consideration, when I'm placing these access points in this building, where's my nearest wiring closet going to be? Where's my nearest fiber power run? Where's that actually at? Is it existing in the building? Is it something you have to design to? Do you have free reign to put anything where you want? Is that part of the budget? You need to think of all those things. And then once you think about those wiring closets, the power comes into play, because can you actually get AC power or DC power that you're running to these switches? Like I said, the fiber runs and the cable runs from those access points to those wiring closet areas. You have to think about the switches that you're putting into them. You might need a 24 port or 48 port, or you need to also think about the PoE capabilities of the switches and the actual capabilities of the switch itself. Does it have SFPs to be able to support those fiber runs? Is it only have a single power supply with 740 watt, or is it a full 1100 watt power, 1100 watt switch, or is it UPoE where you need even more to be able to run full power at all these different switch ports to be able to accommodate all the access points you have in the area, as well as any other devices that are going to be in that environment that are outside of the wireless. So do you have time clocks that have to get wired in? Is there other considerations in the networking equipment that you have to think about outside of just your project? Make sure you're talking with that business team about those things. Uplinks and WAN. So this is also, consideration of that cloud. Do you have the bandwidth to support all the access points that have to check in to whatever that cloud infrastructure is, because there's a specific amount of bandwidth that's needed for each one of those APs. You have to have the latency available for it. Does your WAN circuit actually support that? And as I touched on before, PoE. Anything you think I missed in the physical plant, Jim? I know there's, besides cabinets and racking and some other stuff that you have to think in. Anything else from a design perspective that you would want to keep put into this?
No, but I would say if you're allowed, take pictures at here too, so you can share those with installers and cablers that might be curious about the job.
Absolutely. And as a wireless engineer, you may not have to do this section of work, but it's always good to consider this information, because you have to think of your installers, you have to think of your client, you have to be able to think ahead of other things that may come up, because access points take cables to run them and they have to go somewhere. So it's always good to think about this stuff while you're designing. And then we'll go into documentation. So documentation can be the difference between a great survey and a change order. And this goes right back to what Jim said of taking pictures and documenting those things. If you don't have everything written down, you're going to incur a change order, and the customer's not going to be happy because something got missed, something got put in the wrong spot, it got hung, and then you have to go back and fix it. And now you're paying a cabler or somebody else to go back through and really do all that. So it becomes very important that you mark everything down. So I want to cover this real quick because I know we're coming up on time here, but things included in your documents: AP names, number of APs and types, internal, external, counts, and types of antennas. You know, when we talked about the different antennas you're going to bring on site, are they patches or omnis or sectors or whatever you're using? Make sure you have counts for all of those because they have to match the APs, and those APs have to match the names. You want to make sure you document install heights of both the access point and the antenna, because if there's if you can only get the AP to a specific area and you have to run antenna leads out for a specific distance, you want to mark all those and keep all that down. The antenna mounts themselves, like I said in the beginning, when it comes to aesthetics, you know, what kind of mount is required? Is just a backer board and numbers good, or do you need to have something more professional? Do you need enclosures? So when you talk about NEMA enclosures, are they heated and cooled? You know, what do you need for your environment? Keep that into play. Do you need any wall or roof penetrations? If you're mounting these in, you know, in a freezer, do you have to drill those holes? Because that's going to be a cost, and that's going to be a consideration when it comes to mounting all the access points and antennas. Photos are huge. If you can, get photos of everything: photos of wiring closets, photos of the rack locations and mounting locations, and anything that you can give to your installers to make sure that it's going to go in above rack ABC 1, 2, 3 at 27 feet, and take a picture of the mounting location, take multiple pictures of that area, so that there's no way that they're going to misinterpret where that AP and antenna is going to be mounted. And if you can, actually mark up on those pictures where it's going to be mounted as well. Interference map. So when we talked about bringing in a spectrum analyzer, when you're doing your design, you need to make sure you reference all the interference that you have on there. Anything that you picked up that may be causing a problem, make sure it's marked, and you provide that map as well. If you need to do a channel and power plan, if you're not using RRM or some sort of automatic management of those, make sure you provide that. And then fiber and cabling maps, make sure you can tell where all that stuff's going to be laid out. And then switch counts and power are always good things. Anything else you would want to add, Jim? This is kind of a quick list, but
no, it looks good.
All right. So that is the majority of it. The last part I had was also other things to include in the documentation. Anything else that didn't meet specifications, any sort of SSIDs and security that you have that was required in the initial defining of the design. You want to have a heat map. What's your RSSI, and if you're doing active, do you have signal noise ratios available? What is the in the validation itself? You want to pull down the actual channel and power plan that's actually being represented after it's actually deployed. You want to provide a secondary interference map after the design's been had. You're going back and you're doing your validation. Has anything changed? Has anything come up that wasn't there before? Is there any mounting or placement issues? Having those pictures and marking up where all that stuff's at. Was there any issues there that it might have been an access point or antenna may have been misplaced and needs to be changed? Is there any cabling issues? So going back to the initial thing where are there did you have a cable tester? Did it actually test out right? Get that list from your cable vendor, because when they terminate all these cables, they should be testing them and giving you an entire result list of all those. Make sure you write down serial numbers and MAC addresses of these devices, because when you place them on your design survey documentation, you want to make sure that the APs are in the correct location. You provide all that information so that when they go through and actually configure the access points in the software, whatever the controller or cloud, that they have the right AP serial number and MAC, so they can put the name with it and the location correctly in the software. Connectivity testing, are you doing active or passive tests to validate this? So you want to note out any changes or any issues that may have occurred doing your validation, and then any configuration changes that may need to happen. So all designs aren't perfect. Did you come up with a hole? Did the environment change since the last time you were there? And then once all that's been done and everything's agreed upon, you get a nice little sign off from the customer that says you're good to go. So hopefully this wraps everything up. I know there's probably more that we can go into on another day, but from a high level, I think
Yeah.
this is a good way to look at it. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Great job. And I think we have time for one question quickly before we go over to Eric. Great question here from Anders. He says, I'm arguing for Cat 6A cabling in new installations. Is that right or wrong? That's
Oh,
interesting. Yeah, I think my take, what's the difference between Cat 6 and 6A? Well, 6A, you can do 10 gigabit per second Ethernet at a full 100 meters. Cat
yeah.
6, I think you can only go 50 meters with 10 gigabits per second, but 5 gigabits per second can go 100 meters with Cat 6.
Yeah. And I
But
think
then
also,
I think there's PoE differences, right? What do you think, Chris?
yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to jump on you there. The other thing I think is bend radius. I think there's some additional flexibility in that as well that you need to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about power. I'll have to think about that for a minute. Yeah,
Yeah,
BT
Anders
power.
says, yeah, BT specifies Cat 6A. So if your cable, yeah, if your cable's not up to spec, you could really have a problem with heat. We did a great webinar with Devin Aiken where he got into the details of that. So go look at that on our YouTube page for more there.
Fantastic.